Welcome to Midnight Echoes. These Reddit stories aren't just words on a screen. They're real experiences shared by people who swear they actually happened. Some are strange, some are terrifying, and some will leave you thinking about them long after the video ends. Let's begin. One night, my wife and I couldn't get our 3-year-old and 1-year-old to go to sleep. They were driving us both a little crazy with constant crying. None of our usual strategies were working, and it was making us aggravated at each other. I suggested an evening drive to settle everyone down, and my wife was more than relieved at the idea. We quickly packed up the kids and headed out. The idea was to take a typically quiet county highway for a few miles to the interstate, drive about 10 to 12 miles west, turn around, and come home. The stretch of this county highway is particularly lacking in streetlights, especially considering it's located in the busy suburbs of New York City. We'd just left the local road leading to the county highway and gotten up to speed, which was about 50 miles per hour, when I spotted something in the road ahead. This stretch of highway is frequently crossed by deer, and it's not uncommon for freshly struck carcasses to be littered at its shoulders. By the time I alerted my wife that there was something in the road, we were passing it, and it definitely wasn't a deer. We were traveling in the middle lane on a dark highway, doing 50 miles per hour, and a person was crossing the fast lane into the path of our car. I don't think my wife and I would have been so chilled by someone crossing this section of road had it not been for the rest of the circumstances. First, as mentioned earlier, we were already a little rattled at each other with the kids not complying with their usual bedtime routine. Next, while my wife was glad to get out of the house on this particular night, nap rides had become a thing of the past since our second child was born. Not only was it twice the work to pack and unpack the kids in and out of the car, but we also had twice the precious cargo to keep safe. It just didn't seem worth the trouble and risk 99% of the time. This was an exception. Perhaps the thing that shook us both the deepest out on that dark section of highway was that there were absolutely no cars in front or behind us. This person didn't have to cross at that time. They could have crossed with zero risk, either 10 seconds earlier or later of us passing by. Finally, I thought the person was holding a big stick or bat. My wife didn't see this, but she also was not the first to spot the person. This stick was what tipped the scale and triggered us to call 911. The 911 operator didn't initially think the call deserved a police response. No one had been hurt, and she said people crossed the highway there on foot all the time. It wasn't until I mentioned that I thought the person had a stick that the operator said she was dispatching someone to check it out. We hung up, relieved that perhaps we'd helped prevent someone who was either crazy or intoxicated, not hurt someone else or themselves. What we didn't know this whole time was that our 3-year-old was aware of everything that was happening. He'd not fallen asleep yet and heard us call 911 and specifically mentioned that a person was in the road. I suspect that he detected we were alarmed, and when we told him it was a deer in the road that we called the police about, he said, "But I heard you say a person, not a deer." We felt bad lying to him, but at the time, it seemed like the right thing to do was persist. It had been a deer, and encourage him to go to sleep. We continued on towards the interstate, quietly talking about the circumstances that led us to call the cops, convincing each other it was the right thing to do. Both kids were sound asleep by the time we made it to the juncture where I'd planned to turn around. I don't usually take the same way back home from places, just for a change of scenery, and this is what I'd planned to do on this night. As we took the eastbound service road towards the alternate route home, traffic came to a stop because of a car accident ahead. There was still an opportunity to take the same interstate back, so I took it, somewhat relieved that we could pass the same spot where the person was in the road, maybe getting closure that nothing bad had happened. We were only on that same dark county highway, heading towards home for a few minutes, when I saw the flashing lights against the trees lining the highway. They were still mostly hidden around a big bend in the road ahead. I slowed down, my heart sinking with my wife's, the both of us already knowing what had happened. We were the first car to be stopped on the highway, in full view of the blanket covering the body in the eastbound fast lane. It was only about 15 yards away. One cop car was near the body and another was back further, parked across the middle and slow lanes. One shoe could be seen in the middle lane close to the body. The other could be seen 30 yards down the highway near the shoulder. Between the shoes were small, broken car parts littering the road. Down further were two cars stopped on the shoulder with their flashers on. As the cop whose car was closest to the body approached our car, I heard stirring in the back seat. Oh no, I thought. Thankfully, just as our 3-year popped his head up and asked what was going, an ambulance pulled behind the cop and blocked the view of the body from our child. Before the cop could say anything, we told him what we'd seen right at this spot only 15 minutes before, while heading in the opposite direction. We told him we were the ones who'd called 911 while out on our nap ride, and he told us to stay where we were so he could get our info. While we waited for the cop to come back to us, the cars had started to stack 5 to 6 deep behind us. We watched our opportunity disappear to be granted a quick K-turn and exit off the highway at the entrance not far back, which some drivers had already started to use as an exit. 3 hours later, we made that K-turn on the closed highway, exited the entrance, and went home. The first 15 minutes of that time was spent lying to our 3-year-old that deer who've been hurt on the highway needed ambulances too. He wasn't buying it, but finally he fell back asleep. In the days that followed, both my wife and I were sad and reflective about the situation. We talked about it a lot. We hugged each other and cried. We told family and friends about it in as much detail as possible as part of an unconscious therapy process. Having to rehash everything to an investigator a week later only extended the sadness, but we got closure when the detective called us back at the second week. He said that he was passing on a message from the family of the man who'd been struck and killed, thanking us for providing a description of what happened to their dad in the last moments of his life. The way the detective described it, it didn't make complete sense to them, it seemed, but they were grateful to us nonetheless. The next story was shared by Reddit user Beatenholler around 7 years ago. Wow, this happened to me once too in Brisbane, Australia. I was driving home with some friends in the car, and we saw this guy dressed like the Invisible Man, impossibly tall and very thin, head and hands completely wrapped in bandages, wearing a trench coat and a fedora-type hat, just walking down the middle of a busy motorway. As we drove by, he moved his head to follow our car, but we couldn't see any way he could see through the bandages. We absolutely shit ourselves and started yelling at each other, terrified. So I decided to pull into a side street and turn around to get back on the main road and try to get another look at him. But literally 20 seconds after we first saw him, he was gone. We started to drive home again, all wondering what just happened, and as we turned into our little street, in a neighborhood that was like a labyrinth on a hill, my heart sank as I saw this towering walking towards us on a street. Not only was it terrifying to see that he had watched us drive by and had somehow ended up on our street, but from the initial sighting to home was about 4 kilometers, 2.5 miles approximately, and he had made that distance on foot, in about 7 minutes. We kept driving around for hours that night, too scared to go home, and eventually when we did, there was no sight of him. We locked every door and window and smoked a million cigarettes while sitting with makeshift weapons in the living room all night. I still don't have any explanation for it, and no one else I've spoken to has ever seen the thing. We lived right near one of the largest cemeteries in the country, and strange folk hung around there. But this guy was too tall and too freaky to be a real human, I feel. I didn't feel safe in that neighborhood for a long time after that, and I moved as soon as I could. Next story is shared by Kilroy Khan, posted 4 years ago. This one isn't about a haunting in the dark, but about something real, frozen in time. The Franklin Expedition. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 British sailors and military personnel on 2 ships embarked on a mission to find the Northwest Passage, from the Atlantic across to the Pacific through Arctic waters. The ships, named HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, 2 former warships reclassified as icebreakers thanks to their sturdier builds, departed British waters in 1845 and were never seen again. In subsequent rescue attempts and investigations, it was discovered that quite possibly everything that could have gone wrong on the expedition did. The weight of the ships with their reinforced hulls and decks designed to fire mortars and cannons off of worked against them, as much of the waters crossed were shallow and filled with rocks and icebergs. The time chosen to launch the expedition occurred at one of the coldest Arctic periods in recent history, meaning the polar ice and, particularly, the pack ice, didn't melt like usual as the ships became locked in the frozen water and essentially experienced an endless winter for over 4 years. The food they stored, which was supposed to last for years thanks to the revolutionary new process of canning, was bought at the lowest bidder. Much of the food was improperly sealed and spoiled, leading to food poisoning, and even the ones that were properly sealed and kept intact were riddled with lead thanks to the soldering used to keep the food inside fresh. In conjunction with the lead pipes in the ships, the men would have been drinking out of for years meant the entire crews of both ships was slowly being infected with all manner of diseases, namely botulism, scurvy, and heavy lead. Poisoning, which also affects the mind, leading to memory loss, heavy paranoia, and general mental deterioration, combined with already present tuberculosis that killed a small number of the crew before departing to the Arctic. After about 2 to 3 years stuck in the ice, the captain in charge of the voyage, John Franklin, and many other crew members died under unknown circumstances. The remaining men decided to abandon the ships and try to hike together to the nearest trading outpost on the Back River in Canada, hundreds of miles away. They loaded their rowboats with supplies and fixed them onto sleds to be pulled across the ice. All of the remaining crew perished on that journey. Their remains were later discovered by local Inuit Netsilik tribes, who described desolate campsites filled with skeleton-like corpses, half-built tents, and even human body parts in cookpots, heavily implying that the men resorted to cannibalism in their last desperate hours. Our next story was posted about a week ago on Scary Stories. A simple text message. That should have been impossible. My mom keeps texting me, but she died last year. It started 2 nights ago. I got a text from my mom's number that said, "Did you lock the door?" I froze. Her number had been disconnected after the funeral. I told myself it was some kind of scam or someone using her old number, but the texts kept coming. Last night I got another one. Someone's in the hallway. I checked, shaking, but the hall was empty. I didn't sleep at all. Tonight, I decided to text back. I typed, "Who is this?" and hit send. A minute later, I got a photo in return, blurry, taken from the end of the hallway. It showed me sitting on my bed, looking at my phone. I dropped the phone and ran to the hallway, but no one was there. My front door was still locked, my windows shut tight. I checked the photo again, zooming in, and that's when I noticed something I hadn't before a faint figure behind me in the picture. A woman's silhouette. Her hand was reaching out toward my shoulder. I tried to call the number, but it went straight to voicemail. The automated voice said the number was no longer in service. That's when I heard my phone buzz again. Another text. It said, "Don't be scared, honey. I just wanted to make sure you were safe." My eyes filled with tears. I whispered, "Mom," into the silence. Then another message appeared. This time, the words were shaky, letters uneven, like she was struggling to type, "He's in the house." Before I could move, I heard the floorboards creak behind me. Slowly, I turned toward the sound. My phone slipped from my hand, the screen still glowing with the final message that just appeared. "Run." I bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The lock was cold, almost frozen. I could hear slow, heavy breathing coming from somewhere in the dark living room. Every instinct told me not to look, but I did anyway. There was a man standing there, or something shaped like one. His face was wrong, blurred, like a smudge that kept shifting. I stumbled backward, grabbing my phone from the floor, trying to call 911, but the screen glitched, letters flickering between numbers and words. Then, for a split second, Mom's contact photo appeared again. The phone vibrated once more, and a voice message started playing automatically. It was her voice, weak, distorted. "I tried to warn you. He followed me from the other side." The lights flickered out completely. I could still hear her voice through the phone, whispering softly, "I love you." And underneath that, breathing. Closer now, right behind me. That's the last thing I remember before everything went dark. I woke up this morning on the floor with my phone in my hand. All the texts and photos were gone. The call log was empty, but there was one new message waiting for me. No number, just words. "See you tonight, sweetheart." Our next story isn't about ghosts or shadows in the dark. It's something far more real. A story that actually happened. One that proves sometimes the scariest things out there aren't supernatural at all. Posted by Laura McCabe Moon 6 years ago. I used to have an incredibly chill, skittish little Siamese cat. Not a fighter, not a ruffian. She would hide under the bed when anyone but me was in the house. Landlords and repair workers would say, "I thought you said you had a cat." But she was extremely loyal to me and bonded to me. I was living in an attic apartment where the front door opened onto stairs, and then the stairs went straight up into the living room. One night, she is standing at the foot of the stairs inside the house, yowling her fool head off. Just howling and really going to town. I'm half asleep and listening to her and wishing she would stop. Then I hear it. A hand grabs the doorknob and turns it. Click. Turns it again. Click. Turns it again. Click. Someone is quietly, but forcefully, trying to jimmy open the door by twisting the doorknob hard in the middle of the night. Boom. I'm awake. My feet are on the floor. I'm like immediately vertical. And my cat races to the top of the stairs, looks me in the eyes, and falls silent. She had done her job. This is about 2 a.m., and my boyfriend at the time would sometimes come home super late from his overnight job. So the first thing I do is call him and whisper, asking him if he's trying to get in the front door. He says, "What? No. Call the cops now." turn on all the lights in the house, make noise, get off the phone with me, and call the cops. Then call me right back. I did that, and the doorknob stops. The cops come and search the area and the block and find no one. It never happened again. After that, I also barricaded the door. I'll never forget that what could have been an extremely dangerous, if not potentially brutal, situation in the middle of the night was foiled by my gentle little scaredy cat pussy cat with big saucer eyes, who was terrified of her shadow. But when shit got real, she woke my ass up. I couldn't have asked more of a dog. Cats are badass, never doubt it. My girl has gone on across the rainbow bridge, as they say. But I'll always treasure her loyalty and intelligence in this. The next story was shared online about 6 years ago. It isn't about hauntings or possessions, but about something that actually happened. Something so tragic and shocking, it left an entire workplace scarred for life. A routine day at an industrial laundry, until someone screamed. Years ago, my now husband worked for an industrial laundry company in their head office when a PR disaster happened that also mentally scarred a number of people. Their company collected laundry from large hospitals and medical-type businesses, for example, care homes, and cleaned them. You can imagine the sort of heavy-duty cleaning, bleaching, and boiling needed to remove those kinds of biological contaminants. One day, a laundry cart went through the usual bleaching and boiling cycle before it dropped out onto a conveyor belt to be sorted for drying and pressing, when there was a horrid scream. A small newborn baby's body had been discovered tangled up amongst the sheets. It had been cooked. The laundry workers were distraught. The whole place had to be shut down, police were called, and the laundry was traced back to the hospital to discover what had happened. It turned out thankfully in some ways, stillborn baby had been left in the cot, waiting to be taken down to the hospital mortuary after the parents had said their goodbyes and covered it with a blanket. But somehow, one of the nurses hadn't realized, most likely just coming on shift, and had grabbed up all the linen from the cot and bed in the delivery room, with the body bundled inside, and emptied it into the laundry hamper. The other nurses and parents assumed the baby had been collected by the mortuary to be stored, awaiting their funeral decisions. The laundry was found not to be at fault, but the parents were devastated, and the hospital took a lot of flack. The poor laundry workers who discovered the body ended up being given counseling before eventually quitting. The company later amended its practice, individually emptying each laundry hamper into the industrial machines instead of just tipping them in, to prevent anything like that from ever happening again. In the end, she tracked down the newspaper article and shared the link herself. The story was real, every word of it, just not exactly how she remembered it. Our next story takes us back to a small town, a quiet home on the edge of it, the kind that feels safe until you realize it isn't. What started as a harmless morning routine turned into something far darker and far too real. Just not exactly how she remembered it. Years ago, when I was 8, my family lived in this big, weird house, kind of on the edge of a small town. And the school district was in the middle of a big restructuring, so even though we were only a couple grades apart, my brother and I went to different schools and took different buses. This left me as the last person to leave in the morning and the first person to get home in the afternoon, which meant it was my job to make sure all the lights were off and the door was locked. One morning, I noticed the basement door was open and the light was on, so before I left, I turned off the light and closed the door. When I got home that afternoon, the light was on and the door was open again. I just assumed that I'd forgotten to actually take care of it when I noticed it in the morning. so I went over to turn off the light and close the door. When I got to the top of the basement stairs, I looked, and there was a big, shadowy male figure towards the bottom of the staircase. I freaked out, slammed the door, and pushed a bunch of boxes against it, and then went and hid in my closet. For months, I didn't tell my family, because I was positive what I had seen was a ghost, and didn't think anyone would believe me. Then about a year after that incident, my mom and her boyfriend realized that small amounts of money had been going missing for months, totaling around $800 to $900, but never more than $60 at once. So we all walked around the house with flashlights trying to figure out how they could have gotten in. Turns out some creep was climbing in through a small hole in the outside of the house, shimmying through a crawl space, then coming up into the house through the basement. Realizing I had been alone in the house with him on at least one occasion was one of the worst, most terrifying moments I've ever had. Our next story isn't about ghosts, monsters, or haunted houses. It's about something much more real and far scarier. How a person can simply disappear. This is a personal story, but I think it does illustrate a greater point. I've told the story before, and I'll try to keep it brief. I used to live and work in South Africa with a charity organization, and while there, I became friends with a man originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo, who was now in SA working with our group. Eventually, I ended up moving back to Canada, but we still kept in touch sporadically over Facebook. A couple of years went by, and he stopped updating his profile. It was sad, but people move on, and when you are halfway around the world, friendships can fade. However, a couple of years after that, I was back in South Africa on holidays, and I asked some mutual friends if they knew where he was, so that maybe we could all meet up and catch up on old time. Unfortunately, all they knew was that he had moved away around the time he stopped updating his profile, and no one knew where he ended up. Another friend and I decided to try and track him down. We ended up getting a hold of his family, who were in Kinshasa, DRC. They knew that he had planned to go to Angola for a job opportunity, but they too had not heard from him in well over a year. Sadly, I couldn't stay and continue on the search, but my other friend did. He found that he did indeed make it to Luanda in Angola and was heading towards a town called Luau, near to the Angola/DRC border. However, this is where the trail went cold, and he disappeared off the face of the earth. No one knows what happened to him. Maybe he fell ill and died, and was quickly buried somewhere with no one being informed. Maybe he fell victim to foul play. Maybe in the vast wilderness he got lost, or hurt, or whatever. We will never know. We informed his family of what we found, and they were grateful, but they too have reached closure in feeling that he is dead. Unfortunately, that is the fate that could befall many itinerant workers. And in many areas of developing countries, there is few resources or will available to make more than a cursory search, if that. The point is, it is possible for people to disappear even in this day and age. Usually, it is the less fortunate or itinerant people, or those in areas too remote or undeveloped to have proper social safety nets to help them. We rarely think of the possibly until it affects us or someone we know. But it isn't that hard for us or a loved one to go missing, and the ones left behind to never know what happened. And that is a scary thought. So, these were some of the most chilling real-life stories, all shared by real people on Reddit. Each one reminds us that sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or monsters, they're moments that actually happened. If you enjoyed these stories and want to hear more true horror and mystery tales like this, make sure to subscribe, give this video a like, and share it with someone who loves a good scare. The links to all the original Reddit stories are provided in the description box below. You can check them out for yourself. I'll be back soon with more terrifying stories from the depths of the internet.